Have you ever looked at your grown child and thought to yourself, when did things change between us? Maybe it was the first time they brushed off your advice. Maybe it was how they talked to you at the dinner table with a tone that made you feel small. Or maybe it wasn't one moment at all, but a slow, painful shift where you started to feel less like a parent and more like a burden. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. This is something many parents experience as their children grow up and grow distant. You spend decades raising them, staying up late when they were sick, working hard to give them a better life, sacrificing your own wants and needs just to make sure they were safe and loved. And then, one day you feel invisible, or worse, disrespected. Now I want to be clear, this isn't about blaming them or making you feel like a failure. It's about understanding that relationships evolve. And just like you taught your kids how to walk, talk, and grow into responsible adults, now it's time to teach them how to treat you with the respect and dignity you deserve. Not with anger, not with guilt, but with quiet confidence and wise action. In this video, we're going to talk about 6 powerful shifts that can change the way your adult children see you. These aren't tricks or games. They're mindset shifts, small but strong actions that speak louder than any lecture ever could. And once you start making these changes, you'll be surprised at how your children begin to respond. Let's start with something that might feel uncomfortable at first. Stop chasing their approval. Now I know that might sound strange. You love your children. You want to stay connected. Maybe you've even bent over backward to keep the peace, staying silent when they snap at you, saying yes when you wanted to say no, putting their needs ahead of yours even when it wore you down. You did it because you love them. You did it because you hoped it would make things better. But here's the truth that's hard to swallow. The more you chase their approval, the less they'll respect you. I know that might sting, but it's something many parents learn too late. When you put yourself last every time, you're sending a message, not just to them, but to yourself, that your thoughts and needs don't matter. And once they start to believe that, it's easy for them to treat you accordingly. Let me tell you about Linda. Linda was the kind of mom who never said no. Even in her 70s, she rearranged her entire week if her daughter needed help with the grandkids. She kept her opinions to herself even when her son made choices that broke her heart. When she was frustrated, she stayed quiet. "I just want to keep the family together," she would say. But the more she stayed quiet, the more she disappeared. Her kids didn't ask what she needed. They didn't even ask how she was doing most days. And one day, Linda realized she wasn't being kind. She was being invisible. So she made a small change. She started saying no to things that didn't work for her. She began sharing her thoughts again, calmly, without fear of how they'd react. She stopped begging for attention and started focusing on herself. And something remarkable happened. Her kids started listening. They started asking. They started seeing her again. It all started with self-respect. Because when you stop acting like you need their approval, you begin to regain their respect. Now that we've talked about chasing approval, let's move to another trap many parents fall into: arguing for respect. You know the feeling. Your child says something that cuts deep, and your first instinct is to argue, to defend yourself, to remind them, "I'm still your parent." You raise your voice. They raise theirs. And before you know it, it's just another argument that leaves everyone feeling worse. Here's what I want you to know. Respect doesn't come from fighting for it. It comes from embodying it. Think about the people you've respected most in your life. Were they the loudest? The angriest? Or were they the ones who carried themselves with quiet dignity? Who didn't need to prove their worth because it radiated from how they lived? That's how Bill turned things around. Bill was a retired teacher, smart, strong, the kind of man people used to listen to. But his adult children had stopped taking him seriously. They laughed at his advice. They talked over him. And the more he pushed back, the worse it got. He told me once, I felt like a ghost in my own family. And one day, he stopped arguing. Instead, he started showing up differently. When his daughter interrupted him, he didn't raise his voice. He paused, waited, and calmly said, I'll speak when I have your attention. He didn't demand respect. He modeled it. It didn't change overnight. But slowly, his children started treating him differently. They saw a man who wasn't desperate to be heard, but who was worth hearing. A man who didn't need to fight to matter, because his presence said it all. The lesson is simple. You don't need to convince your children to respect you. You need to show them what respect looks like by how you treat yourself, especially in difficult moments. Let them feel your strength in your silence. Let them see your confidence in your calm. Let your dignity speak louder than your words. Respect isn't something you can beg for. It's something you reclaim through your choices, your presence, and your example. And that brings us to a deeper layer, one that many parents never realize is at play. It's the emotional dependence that quietly creeps in as we grow older. You may not say it out loud, but inside, you might be thinking, why haven't they called? Why don't they visit more? Don't they care? That longing is real. That ache is real. But the moment your children sense that you need them to feel good about yourself, the dynamic changes, and not for the better. It's not that they don't love you. It's that emotional dependence makes people feel trapped, even your own kids. When you rely on them to feel needed, they start pulling away. Not because they don't care, but because the pressure makes them uncomfortable. Carol was one of the sweetest women I've ever met. She had 3 grown children and a heart full of love. But after retirement, she found herself waiting by the phone, checking the clock, rereading old messages, holding back tears every time the weekend came and went without a call. And when she couldn't take it anymore, she started calling first, leaving voicemails, sending reminders. Just wanted to say hi, she'd say. But the more she reached out, the more distant they became. So she made a brave decision. She stopped waiting. She stopped chasing. Instead, she signed up for a painting class, started walking with a neighbor every morning, joined a local church group. She began building a life outside of her kids, and in doing so, she stopped depending on them to feel whole. Guess what happened next? The phone started ringing. Her daughter asked, "How was your class, Mom?" Her son said, "Sounds like you've been busy lately." They started seeing her not as someone who needed them, but as someone who was living fully. And that's the key. Emotional independence doesn't mean you love them less. It means you love yourself enough not to rely on them for your worth. And when they see that, they'll start respecting you. Not because they have to, but because they want to. There's something remarkable that happens when you begin to shift your focus back to yourself. When you stop needing your children to fill the emotional gaps in your life, you give them space to see you as a person again, not just a parent with expectations. You become someone with your own story, your own joys, and your own strength. And that shift, while quiet, speaks louder than any demand ever could. But even as you build that inner strength, there's something else that needs to happen. Something just as essential. You need to draw a line. Not out of anger, but out of love for yourself. Too many parents think that setting boundaries means creating distance, or worse, starting conflict. But the truth is, boundaries don't push people away. They teach them how to treat you. When you let someone speak to you harshly, when you let them interrupt, ignore, or belittle you, you're silently telling them that it's okay. And if it's okay once, it will happen again. Let me tell you about Jack. Jack spent his whole career as a leader in business. He managed people, made decisions, and carried himself with confidence. But at home, Around his grown kids, he was different. They interrupted him constantly. They dismissed his opinions. Sometimes they even made jokes at his expense. At first he laughed along, not wanting to cause friction. But deep down, it chipped away at him. Then one day, something changed. His son was talking over him during a family dinner. Again. And instead of staying silent, Jack looked up and said, "I'll finish when you're ready to listen." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. But his tone was clear, calm, and firm. A few days later, his daughter brushed off his opinion on something he cared about. And he said, "You don't have to agree with me, but I do expect to be treated with respect." At first, they didn't know how to respond. They pushed back a little, rolled their eyes. But Jack didn't flinch. He had drawn a line and he stood behind it. And over time, they adjusted. They listened more. They thought before speaking, because Jack showed them that respect was no longer optional. That's the power of boundaries. Not as walls to block people out, but as guidelines that let them know where you stand. And more importantly, where you refuse to be walked over again. Now I know some of you are thinking, but what if they get upset? What if I make things worse? Let me ask you this. What's worse, temporary discomfort or a lifetime of being treated like you don't matter? You don't have to yell. You don't have to threaten. All you need is consistency. Boundaries are not about being harsh. They're about being clear. And clarity is kindness, not just for you, but for your children too. Because deep down, they want to know how far is too far. And when you show them, you don't just earn their respect, you earn their trust. But boundaries only work if you back them up with action. And this brings us to something many parents struggle with: giving too much for too long without being appreciated. It's natural to want to help your kids, especially when they're struggling. Maybe you've given financial support, free babysitting, a place to stay, or even just your time and attention over and over again. And at first, it might feel good. You're needed. You're useful. You're showing love. But over time, something shifts. The thank yous get shorter. The favors turn into expectations. And one day, you realize they're not grateful anymore. They just expect it. And when you stop giving, they get upset. David found himself in that very place. He'd always been the reliable dad. When his kids needed money, he pulled from his savings. When they needed help moving, he showed up with boxes and muscle. He'd drop everything if one of them called. But when he had surgery and needed a ride home, no one could make the time. That moment hit him hard. Not just physically, but emotionally. So he made a quiet decision. No more giving without gratitude. He stopped offering help unless asked. And even then, he only said yes if it truly worked for him. At first, his kids were confused. Some were even irritated. But eventually, they began to realize something important. His help wasn't automatic anymore. It was a gift, a choice. And that's how it should be. Generosity loses its power when it becomes expected. But when it's given with intention and when it's appreciated, it becomes meaningful again. So if you're constantly giving and not receiving respect in return, take a step back. Ask yourself, am I helping because I want to, or because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? If your kindness is being taken for granted, it's time to reset the balance. Not because you're bitter, but because you know your time, energy, and love are valuable. And that leads us to something deeper, something life-changing. The moment you stop trying to earn respect through giving and start earning it by living. Too often, we make our children the center of our world. Every decision, every plan, every conversation revolves around them. And while that may come from love, it can quietly send the message that we don't have a life of our own. That we're waiting for a call, a visit, or some attention to make us feel alive again. But what if you stopped waiting? What if you chose to live fully, regardless of how often they call? That's exactly what Susan did. After losing her husband, she poured all her energy into her kids. She checked in constantly, gave unsolicited advice. She expected them to be her emotional anchor. But the more she leaned on them, the more they pulled away. Until one day, she woke up and realized she wasn't just lonely. She was putting her life on hold, hoping they'd fill the gaps. So she did something brave. She joined a local book club, started taking day trips with friends, signed up for yoga, even though she'd never tried it before. She started living like someone with a full life, not someone waiting for one. And the most beautiful thing happened. Her children noticed. They became curious, engaged. They called more. They visited more, not because she asked, but because they admired her independence. They respected the vibrant, joyful woman she had become. When your life is full, your children don't feel pressured to fill it. They don't see you as a burden or a responsibility. They see you as someone they want to spend time with, someone who inspires them. And that, more than anything else, earns their respect. So take a moment and ask yourself, what brings you joy outside of your children? What passions, hobbies, or friendships have you been putting on hold? What dreams did you set aside while raising a family that still quietly live inside you? It's never too late to begin again. To show your children that you are more than a parent. You are a person. Whole, strong, alive. Because respect doesn't come from what you give them. It comes from what you give yourself. There's something truly powerful about watching someone step back into their own life. When you begin honoring your time, protecting your peace, and choosing yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a strong, centered way, you stop needing others to validate you. And when that happens, something subtle but extraordinary shifts. People around you begin to see you differently, especially your adult children. Because let's be honest, respect isn't something we can force. It's something we invite through who we are and how we carry ourselves. And the more you embody that quiet strength, the more your children will begin to reflect it back to you. But maybe right now, as you sit with all of this, a part of you still wonders if it's too late. Maybe the distance with your children has grown wider than you ever imagined. Maybe there have been harsh words, cold silences, or long gaps without a phone call. You might think, I've already lost their respect. What's the point in trying now? Let me tell you something that might just shift your perspective. It's never too late to model the respect you want to receive. Never too late to walk with grace. Never too late to change the story. Yes, it takes time. Yes, it may feel lonely at first. But the truth is, most relationships don't heal because of one grand gesture. They heal slowly, steadily, through consistent shifts in how we show up. And that starts with you. Not with waiting for your children to wake up and suddenly realize how much you matter. Not with lectures or guilt trips. But with steady, confident choices, made day by day, moment by moment. When you begin showing that your time is valuable, that your voice matters, that your peace is non-negotiable, you stop being someone they overlook and start being someone they admire. Think of it this way. If your child saw a stranger treat you the way they sometimes do, would they stand up for you? Would they say, "Hey, don't talk to my mom like that"? If the answer is yes, then somewhere inside them the respect is still there. It's just been buried beneath years of habit, assumption, and unspoken boundaries. Your job now isn't to demand that respect back, it's to help them remember it. And the most effective way to help someone remember your worth is to stop acting like you've forgotten it. Respect doesn't live in raised voices. It lives in steady eyes. It lives in the way you pause before saying yes to something that drains you. It lives in the way you excuse yourself from conversations that belittle you. It lives in the hobbies you pick up again, the friends you reconnect with, the confidence you carry, even when no one is watching. Now, if you're thinking, but what if they don't respond? That's okay. This isn't about controlling their reaction. It's about reclaiming your own sense of value, regardless of whether they change right away. You're not doing this to manipulate them into respecting you. You're doing it because you finally realize that you deserve to be respected by them, yes, but more importantly, by yourself. And let's not forget the ripple effect of these small changes. When your children see you living fully, not waiting by the phone, not giving endlessly without acknowledgement, not biting your tongue to avoid tension, they begin to reevaluate the role you play in their lives, not because you've asked them to, but because they can't help but notice the shift. They feel it. And over time, they respond to it. You become less of a background figure and more of a guiding presence. Not through control, but through calm. Not through demands, but through dignity. If you've ever found yourself lying awake at night, wondering where the closeness went, wondering if your children even see you anymore, I want you to know something. They do. Even when they pretend not to. Even when they act distant or distracted or dismissive, deep down, they still carry the imprint of who you've been in their lives. They still feel the weight of your sacrifices, your love, your presence. But sometimes they need to be reminded, not with words, but with actions. Actions like saying no when a request crosses your line. Actions like waiting for a sincere thank you before offering more. Actions like pursuing your own happiness without apology. These aren't punishments. They're gentle but firm reminders that you are still a whole, valuable human being. And that's where respect begins to grow again, not through fear, but through admiration. So take a breath. Look around your life right now, not at what's missing, but at what's possible. Maybe it's joining a local walking group. Maybe it's painting again, or dancing, or gardening, or reading at the library. Maybe it's reaching out to an old friend, not to talk about your kids, but to talk about you. You deserve a life that excites you, not just one that revolves around waiting. And in building that life, your children will begin to see you with new eyes. They'll see that you are not dependent on them for your identity. They'll see that your love is steady, but not at the cost of your dignity. And they will rise to meet that version of you, not out of guilt, but out of genuine respect. Before we end today, I want to remind you of something simple but powerful. You are not here just to take up space. You are here to live fully, to walk proudly, to speak gently but firmly, and to be treated with the respect you've always deserved. If your children have forgotten that, then it's time to remind them. Not with lectures, but with how you carry yourself from this moment forward. Respect is not given freely. It's earned, but not through sacrifice. It's earned through self-respect, through courage, through boundaries, and through living a life that honors your own worth. So today, I invite you to choose just one thing, just one action that tells the world you respect yourself. It could be as small as saying no to something that drains you, or as big as picking up a dream you once let go. Whatever it is, start there. Start now. And if this message spoke to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one change you're planning to make? What's one thing you're ready to reclaim? Your voice matters. Your experience matters. And when we share, we help others find the courage to change too. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel, Strong Elderly Life. We're here to support you, inspire you, and remind you that the best years of your life don't have to be behind you. In fact, they might just be beginning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave enough to look within. And most of all, thank you for choosing to live with strength, grace, and purpose. Here's to earning back respect, not by demanding it, but by becoming someone who naturally commands it. Here's to living your best life at any age.